You don't hate hard work. What you actually hate is that hard work stopped feeling like anything a long time ago. Think about that for a second. You sit down to do something genuinely difficult, something that matters, and within 30 seconds, your hand is already moving toward the phone. Not because you're lazy, not because you're broken beyond repair. It's because your brain has been systematically conditioned by a decade of frictionless reward. Every notification, every scroll, every 2-second clip that fires your dopamine and demands absolutely nothing from you in return. Musashi lived in a world that offered none of that. No comfort, no safety net, no algorithm designed to keep him passive. And he became the most dangerous man who ever walked the Japanese archipelago. What he knew about the human mind, you're about to find out. Let's get into what is actually happening inside your skull, because nobody is telling you this straight. Your dopamine baseline is destroyed. And before you take that as an insult, understand that it's a biological diagnosis, not a character judgment. Dopamine isn't just the pleasure chemical the pop science crowd keeps referencing. It's your motivational architecture, the system your brain uses to evaluate whether something is worth pursuing in the first place. When you flood that system with cheap, effortless stimulation, the phone screen, the pornography, the social media hit, the fast food, the endless low-effort entertainment, your brain doesn't become more motivated. It becomes less, because it's constantly recalibrating. It raises the internal threshold. What used to register as a reward now barely registers at all. And what used to feel completely normal, like sitting at a desk in silence and doing focused, concentrated work, now feels indistinguishable from punishment. That's the trap nobody warned you about. The hustle culture industry lied to you about this. Spectacularly. They told you the problem was effort, that you just needed more fire, more intensity, more getting your mind right. So they sold you pre-workout, morning routine reels, cold plunge content, and $97 courses from men who made their money selling courses. But the problem was never effort. The problem is your stimulus threshold, and no amount of motivational screaming moves that line. What moves it is systematically lowering the noise floor of your daily life. Here's where neuroplasticity enters the conversation. Your brain is genuinely not fixed. The pathways carved by years of high stimulus, low-effort behavior can be restructured, but only through a specific kind of training that the modern world has made almost culturally unacceptable. Sustained, deliberate boredom. The willingness to sit in discomfort without reaching for relief. Musashi understood this mechanism 400 years before neuroscience had language for it. He called it Shugyo, austere training. And the word austere is doing critical work here because it's not synonymous with intense. Intensity is exciting. Austerity is the deliberate removal of everything exciting until only the bare act remains. Musashi practiced suburi, single-strike sword repetitions, for hours without variation, without novelty, without external reward of any kind beyond the movement itself. He wasn't simply building muscle memory in the conventional sense. He was forcing his nervous system to locate signal inside silence, to find something meaningful inside absolute monotony. He was, by modern behavioral psychology standards, manually recalibrating his dopamine baseline through sustained, effortful repetition. Don't confuse this for self-punishment. This is reconstruction surgery performed on the architecture of your own motivation. And the third element, the one Musashi treated as non-negotiable, was the complete divorce of emotion from action. Not because he was a cold or unfeeling man, but because he understood that emotion is latency. Emotion hesitates. Emotion asks, "Do I feel like this today?" And in a brain conditioned by cheap stimulation, the honest answer is almost always no. So the question itself becomes the enemy. His answer was to make the question irrelevant. The action comes first. The feeling, if it arrives at all, arrives afterward, when the work is already done and the blade has already moved. Stop waiting to feel ready. That version of you is not coming today. March 1604, Northeast Kyoto. The air is cold and carries pine resin and mud, and Musashi is 21 years old. He has already dismantled the Yoshioka school twice over. The first time, he arrived late to deliberately rattle Yoshioka Seijuro's composure, then left him broken on the ground. The second time, he came back and killed Denshichiro with a single blow from a wooden sword, which is arguably the more humiliating detail. The Yoshioka clan wasn't a fighting school anymore after that. They were an open wound, and open wounds, left unaddressed, go septic with a particular kind of rage. So they built a trap at Ichijoji Sagarimatsu, a pine tree standing at the northeast road leading out of the city. Not one man. Not a duel. Between 60 and 70 warriors, swordsmen, archers carrying yumi bows, and matchlock gunners with Tanegashima rifles positioned throughout the tree line. They brought the young heir, Mata Shichiro, to stand as the symbolic face of the clan's revenge. What they actually built was a coordinated execution, and they expected a body. Musashi arrived before any of them. This is the detail that gets glossed over in every casual retelling, and it's the most important one. He didn't walk into the ambush unaware. He arrived in the dark, read the terrain while it was still empty, and started calculating. He mapped the probable lines of fire. He timed the reload window on the matchlock rifles, roughly 1 to 2 minutes between shots, which in a sustained engagement is an enormous tactical opening. He identified the most likely archer positions based on the elevation and tree cover. He located the rice paddies to his left and marked them mentally as an exit corridor if the numbers became unmanageable. Then he waited in the dark and let them come. When the Yoshioka men take their positions, when the torches begin to flare across the clearing and 60-plus warriors fan out through the trees, Musashi walks forward. And before the trap can fully close around him, he kills Matashichiro immediately. The mission was always the head. Take the symbolic center of their operation in the first second and watch the coordinated formation fracture into individual reactions. Then everything releases at once. Arrows cutting through smoky air, gunfire cracking from the tree line, swordsmen closing from multiple directions with the particular urgency of men who know they vastly outnumber their target. This is precisely the moment where a normally disciplined man freezes, not out of cowardice, but because the nervous system floods with cortisol, and the brain, suddenly overwhelmed with too many competing threats and no clean hierarchy of priorities, locks into paralysis. Musashi does not freeze. He is already moving before the thought forms. This is Mushin, the no-mind state, and it's the most misunderstood concept in all of samurai philosophy. It isn't emptiness, and it certainly isn't passivity. It's what neurologically happens when a physical movement has been repeated so many thousands of times that the brain no longer needs to consciously initiate it. The motor system and the cognitive system stop negotiating with each other. The body executes, and the mind stays free to observe, adapt, and redirect. What looks from the outside like supernatural calm is actually the output of years of deliberate, monotonous, unglamorous repetition. And underneath all of that, pain was operating as pure information. When you strip the emotional overlay from physical suffering, what remains is data. An arrow that grazes your arm tells you the archer's position and angle. A blade that finds resistance tells you about the opponent's footing. The pain isn't evidence that you're losing. It's evidence that you're still in the fight, and it's telling you exactly where to look next. Musashi broke through the ambush and disappeared into the rice fields. 60 to 70 men sent to end him. One walked out. Musashi wrote The Book of 5 Rings in a cave. And that detail is not incidental. Not a metaphorical cave, not a romantic retreat. Raigen Cave, carved into the face of Mount Iwato, in the final 2 years of his life. No household staff, no students, no creature comforts of any kind. He brought ink, paper, and the silence of stone. And every single morning the structure was identical. Rise, write, train, not because he was following someone else's prescribed routine, but because he had long since understood that structure isn't a constraint on a disciplined man. It's the very medium through which a disciplined man operates. Here's what that morning rigidity was actually protecting. Decision fatigue is a documented neurological reality, and it operates silently enough that most people never identify it as the source of their failures. Every choice you make, including the trivial ones, draws from the same finite cognitive resource pool that powers your willpower, your focus, and your capacity for sustained behavioral execution. This is why experienced surgeons make statistically worse decisions as the operating day lengthens. It's why judicial parole boards grant fewer favorable rulings in the hours after lunch. The brain has no mechanism for distinguishing a consequential decision from a trivial one, which means the man who spends his first waking hour negotiating with himself about what to eat, what to wear, and whether to check his phone has already burned through cognitive capital he needed for something that actually mattered. Musashi's response to this problem was what he called code. In the Dokkodo, the final document he wrote days before his death, he recorded 17 behavioral precepts, not inspiration, not philosophy for contemplation. Operating rules. Do not pursue the taste of good food. Do not hold on to possessions you no longer need. Resentment and complaint are appropriate, neither for oneself nor others. These weren't expressions of a cold personality. They were pre-decisions, each one eliminating a category of daily deliberation so that no mental energy was wasted on questions that had already been answered. What remained every single day was the full force of his cognition directed toward strategy, toward craft, toward the relentless refinement of his capability. The way is in training. That's the 9th principle, and it sounds simple until you sit with the full weight of what it demands. Not training when motivated. Not training when conditions are favorable. Training as the baseline state of existence, repeated daily with enough consistency that the training stops being something you do and becomes something you are. Routine operating as ritual means the morning sequence is structurally non-negotiable, not because willpower forces it, but because the decision was made the night before and therefore doesn't require a decision today. You wake at a fixed hour. The phone stays face down until the first work block is complete. Your body moves before the dopamine system has oriented itself toward distraction. You're working with your own biology here. The morning cortisol spike represents your body's natural peak arousal window, and if the algorithm gets to it before you do, you've handed over your sharpest hours to someone who designed their product specifically to capture them. This is not inspiration. This is architecture, and architecture doesn't require your permission to hold weight. It either stands or it doesn't. The mood is not arriving today, and you need to accept that before any of this works. Not tomorrow either. Not after the weekend, not once the circumstances improve. The motivational state you're waiting for is a biological event that requires the very behavior you keep postponing in order to occur, which means waiting for it is structurally identical to waiting for a fire to light wood that you haven't yet struck a match to. The mechanics don't run in that direction. So here is what you actually do, in sequence, starting with the next difficult thing in front of you. Before beginning any hard task, spend 60 seconds holding the finished state in your mind. Not the process, not the effort required, not the distance between where you are and where you need to be. The output, the completed draft, the finished training session, the conversation that's already been handled. This isn't positive thinking in the motivational poster sense. It's neural priming, a practical application of behavioral psychology. Musashi framed it as visualizing the finished sword before raising the hammer. A bladesmith who doesn't carry the exact shape of the finished blade in his mind wastes iron, wastes heat, wastes strikes. Your attention operates on the same principle. Every unfocused effort is a wasted blow. Then move before you feel anything resembling readiness. The neurochemical sequence runs in a specific order that most people have completely backwards. You move, the motor cortex activates. Dopamine releases through the striatum as a direct response to effortful physical behavior. And then the drive to continue emerges as a consequence of having already started. Motivation is the output of action, not the prerequisite for it. This is why the 5-second protocol works when nothing else does. Count backward from 5, and when you reach 1, your body moves before the deliberating part of your brain can construct a sufficient argument against it. The feeling of momentum is real. It's just downstream of the first step, not upstream. Now for the weapon that nobody in the productivity space wants to sell you, because there's no product attached to it. Intentional boredom. 30 minutes, no screen, no audio, no stimulation. Sit in a room and do nothing designed to entertain or inform you. What your brain produces in response will be ugly. Genuine anxiety, physical restlessness, the overwhelming sense that you are wasting time that could be spent consuming something. That reaction is neurochemical withdrawal from a tolerance your brain has quietly built over years. And if you stay in it, rather than reaching for the relief that's always one arm's length away, something shifts. The threshold drops. The brain, no longer being compared against the dopamine spike of a viral clip, starts to find the focused work session genuinely preferable to the silence. Work starts to win the comparison by default because you've removed the competition. This is the samurai trick, stripped of all mysticism, not discipline manufactured through raw willpower, which is finite and unreliable, but discipline manufactured through neuroplasticity, through the systematic restructuring of what your brain categorizes as rewarding. The boredom is not the absence of something. It is the condition that makes everything else possible. Jocko Willink didn't encounter Musashi's philosophy and find it inspiring in the way a man finds a motivational quote inspiring. He recognized it, the way you recognize a principle you've already lived in the body before you ever had words for it. Different century, radically different context, same fundamental operating system running underneath. When Jocko says discipline equals freedom, he's not producing content for a morning routine reel. He's describing a neurological condition, the specific kind of cognitive and behavioral freedom that becomes available to a man once he has removed the daily tax of self-negotiation from his life. The man who pre-decided his training, his schedule, and his standards wakes up with more available mental capacity than the man who has to debate himself into action every single morning, because he already settled that argument the night before. The undisciplined man believes freedom is what you get when there are no rules constraining you. He has it exactly backwards, and his daily experience of being perpetually behind, perpetually distracted, and perpetually dissatisfied is the proof. Freedom is the absence of the need to decide in the moment. Discipline is the process through which you build that absence. Those two things are not in tension. One produces the other. So here is the protocol. Not a suggestion, not a framework you can adapt to your comfort level. A protocol. Today, you identify the 3 highest dopamine inputs currently running in your daily life. Social media cycling, gaming, pornography, news consumption, whatever yours specifically are, and you eliminate the 2 most accessible ones for 7 consecutive days without negotiation or moderation. The objective is the initial recalibration of your dopamine baseline, and partial reduction does not produce the effect. It has to be cold. Second, you install one daily practice that is physically repetitive, cognitively monotonous, and provides no entertainment value. The specific form is genuinely secondary. A 10-minute run, 20 push-ups, cold water immersion, manual labor outside. What matters is the repetition, the boredom, and the daily return to it regardless of motivation state. Third, you make one binding structural decision about your morning that eliminates the phone from the first hour entirely. Not a guideline, a rule with no exception clause built in. These are not the beginning of a transformation. They are the first 3 hammer blows on a blade that will take a long time to finish. But the blade doesn't form without them. Musashi accumulated 61 undefeated duels across a lifetime, and none of that started from a position of advantage. He came from a broken household, grew up inside an era of almost constant political violence, and built everything he became through decades of Shugyo, through the kind of deliberate, unglamorous, neuroplastic rewiring that modern culture has no patience for and no interest in selling you. He never needed external permission to begin. He was already moving before the feeling arrived. He was already training before the motivation appeared. He was already standing at Ichijoji in the dark, reading the terrain in silence, while the men sent to kill him were still on their way. That is the standard this channel is building toward. If everything you've heard today dissolves the moment you close this video, nothing changes. And somewhere in your gut, you already know what that trajectory looks like played out over years. But if you are genuinely done being administered by your own impulses, done surrendering your sharpest hours to an algorithm that was engineered in a lab specifically to keep you passive and scrolling, then you already know the first move. This is Katana Mindset. Forge yourself here or stay dull. Subscribe, because the next protocol is already being sharpened. Master yourself, or the world will master you.